Okay, so we're back again. I just want to show you the first part of a James Bond film from 2008. It's the one called Quantum of Solace, how do you say it? Solace. Quantum of Solace. And it's just the opening scene. Notice how they use sound, music, how they use cutting, how they use camera movements. First I'll show you like it is, and then I take away the sound and we see the same first minute without the sound, and you will understand how everything is just composed of little bits and not really a depiction of a real event, but something that is being constructed, assembled for the benefit of us experiencing action scene, very high impact action scene. Okay.
It's a little bit more intense than Gone with the Wild.
It's a little more intense, yes, but if we take off the sound, I think we take off a lot of intensity too. We can see that they cut rapidly, but it's not at all as absorbing as it was before, right? Now we just look at it and we can see how many times they cut and how many times we just see part of a car or part of an action. There's a lot of movement in the picture, but I think also the camera is often moving, sliding back and forth where it doesn't really need to be doing that. We get the impression of a lot of action, but we don't really see who's in front, who's behind, and what is happening. We know it's a James Bond film, so probably he will survive this first meeting, otherwise it would be terrible. We're so accustomed to seeing professionally made films, television, videos, that we immediately notice it when there is something wrong. That's why it's so very hard to make a good film when you start out. And you have to be very experienced to make it nice and smooth. And you have to think about it. How can I avoid becoming an amateur? How can I make it smooth and nice and look professional? There are different ways of avoiding becoming an amateur too, obviously, but you have to work on it. And it's not that easy. Okay, but after this workshop, of course, you will do well, all of you. This is a film from 1924, so it's almost 100 years old. It's a French director, Abel Gance, who did a great film called Napoleon. We don't have all of it left, but because it was supposed to last 4 hours, about 2 hours have been left. And this is just a very short montage. I show it to you. There's a guy's film historian speaking over it, but I just want you to show a little bit of how he made a film with rapid cuts and camera movements and other effects back in 1924. Don't think that film tricks was something that was invented with MTV or within the last 20 years. It was there from the very beginning. So this is 1924. Abel Gance.
This gigantic epic film, 6 hour long originally, was meant to be only the first of 6 total films about Bonaparte's life. Only the first film was made, and the version available to us is a 4-hour cut. More recent restorations add nearly 2 hours to the running time, but Francis Ford Coppola claims distribution rights and refuses to allow the film to be shown without his father's score. The last scene of what we do have is perhaps more innovative than the first. Here we get a triptych meant to be shown on 3 separate screens standing side by side in the theater. The effect is powerful. This sort of feel is usually accomplished through a montage, superimposition, and crossfades, but with this triptych we can fully feel the grand sweep of history.
Even some experiments with color, and this is about 10 years before color film was common. Gone with the Wind, as we saw, was one of the first which really had good colors in it. Colors came in the 1930s, Sound came in late 1920s, but this is a forerunner to all of that. Now, I want to turn to the very first film, or what is considered to be the very first film shown. There were other experiments about the same time with moving images, but this is considered the first cinema film because it was shown in a cafe in Paris in 1895, second day of Christmas. And they charged people for watching it in that cafe, so they paid for watching a film. Therefore, it was the first film. It's only when you pay for it that it's real. All the other things were just experiments. So, and it's the famous shot of workers leaving the factory. Workers leaving the factory. It's a factory in Lyon. And we see the workers leave the factory. And it's just very short because they could only make short rolls of film. So it is about, I think, 25, 30 seconds long. There exist two or three versions of this, but still very much the same. Workers leaving the factory. And my question to you is, while we watch it, there should be no sound on it. People have added different sounds on different examples on YouTube, but on this one I think I have avoided sound. Is it a documentary or is it fiction? The very first film, is it a documentary? You know the distinction between documentary and fiction? Can we talk about that in connection with the very first film? And it's just about to end, so I stop it there. Okay. Does anybody have you might say that this is a very stupid question, but then explain why it's a stupid question. Is it a documentary or is it fiction? Documentary? Why? What makes it a documentary, you think?
Well, it shows how people are living in the factory. You know, it's like it gives an insight of when is it, 20s?
1895 in Lyon.
Yeah, so what happened in a factory?
Anybody object to being a documentary?
Well, I think they made like they told the people to come out of the factory, or like they said, wait all at we are starting the film and now go out of the building. So it might not be a documentary because of that.
Because if you change something, arrange it, have people behave in a certain way, then it's not really a documentary, but it looks like a documentary, but it...
Well, that still doesn't change the fact that it could be a documentary.
No, it could be, yes. No, but it's, to cut it short, it's a modern discussion whether something is a documentary or not. It's a question of how we label things. And often when a documentary shows something that some people don't like, then they criticize not the subject or the message of the film, but they say, oh, it's not a real documentary because they changed something or there was some factual little thing that wasn't correct. But it can be portraying aspects of reality and have a message that could be important. But so this is a tricky question. But it can be argued that even this very first film, there is something about it that's strange. We see, for example, a person coming out and then going back in again, and a little later he comes out. Why? Because he wanted to be in the picture. So even in this, the very first film recording, there were people reacting to the presence of the camera. We can also see that people are avoiding to go into the camera. So the camera is not invisible. We can see it on their reaction. And luckily they stopped and they could move the camera before the horses came out. And I think there's, in one of the other roles, they're even sort of waving to the cameraman when passing it. So it's not there as an invisible observer. The camera is there as a visible thing. So it's interacting with reality, so to speak. Another objection I've heard was that this is not workers leaving the factory because they're obviously dressed for a party, the women in long dresses. Yeah, Miriam?
Sorry, yeah, but it's in, what did you say, 1895? They
1895.
always wore long dresses in 1895. This is what working women would look like in 1895.
Very good, Miriam. Yes, this is the Belle Epoque, I think you call it, isn't it? Yes. So they were nicely dressed, and the men were nicely dressed, even though they were workers. They were wearing a suit and a hat, and very gallant
Because they
people.
were
That's
outside.
That's how we do in France, right? Even at that time. But then there's something else. This is something that dawned on me a little later. I say, no, but this is all phony, because it says workers are leaving the factory.
But they're
No.
not all-
Look at the shadows from the sun. It is in the middle of the day, because they needed a lot of light to film with a camera at that time. So it's not in the evening. It's at noon, middle of the day. You can see it, shadows from the sun. Very short, so it's in the middle of the day. And workers wouldn't leave the factory in the middle of the day, would they? Yes, they would.
For lunch.
They're going home for lunch. They do that in France
Yeah,
still.
2 hours.
Yes, 2 hours, yes. So it is still a documentary. They're just not leaving in the evening, they're leaving in the middle of the day. Yes?
I have a question.
Yes.
I mean, under which criteria we can consider this film a documentary or fiction? Is that, for example, I'm thinking, does it require to be an acting behavior in order to categorize it as documentary, for example?
No, there is there's no simple answer to that question, or no right or wrong answer in a way. It is an ongoing discussion, what is a documentary and what is not. It's a long discussion, and there's no simple criteria. So it is in a way just a question to make us become aware that the way we look at film, we have some categories, we have some preconceptions. One of them is it real, or did they change reality? Are there actors or are there not? I think it's more interesting to look at the filmic devices or tricks they're using. Here, they're just putting up the camera and recording, and there's no editing of it, but still they have considered a good camera angle to get the action of people leaving. They're doing it at a good moment. If they did it 5 minutes earlier, there would have been no action. So, and they're using good light, so they have been thinking about it. The guy who went out and back in has been identified. He later became a traveling photographer in the Lumiere brothers photographic or filmic enterprise, where they filmed different footage from around the world and then showed it in the upcoming cinemas around the world. So he did become part of the picture, as he wanted.
Was he also part of the production?
He became one of the producing photographers.
But in this production? Was he
Here
part-
he was just walking out and walking back in.
Yeah, but I mean, as one of the producers of this.
No, but it's two brothers who owned this factory who made the film. And the trick about, the special thing about it, this factory made photographic equipment, not film equipment, but they made for still photos. That's why they knew something about what is meant to be in the picture or not. And of course they knew about, they were experimenting to do moving images and to record that. Gardener, it's called in English, or in French, the arroseur arrosé. It is the man watering who is becoming watered himself. And I could ask again, is it a documentary or is it fiction? And I think this time we will not be in doubt about it. Documentary?
Nope.
But there was a gardener watering the garden, was there not? There was a boy stepping on it. Why do we know that it is sort of a setup?
There's acting.
They're acting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has a storyline.
Yeah, it has a storyline, yes.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, the guy tricks the man, and then he gets what he deserves.
Yes. So there is an action, it's following the sort of dramatic curve of Aristotle. There is a beginning situation, a disturbance or something disruption, and then we are restoring back to normal at the end. So it's sort of beginning, middle, and end. It's great that Aristotle became famous for saying that and many other things, but it's as simple as that. Good story has beginning, middle, and end. In the middle, that's where the drama is, and we're coming back to something that looks like the beginning there. And they timed it well because they didn't have more than just 40 seconds of film roll. So they knew that they had, probably the one guy turning the camera was saying, "Get back there, we're just running out of film now, and hurry." Okay. I love this because I love camera movements. But there are no camera movements. Why don't they just move the camera there? Why don't they just turn the camera? Yes, Miriam?
This is a really old camera, right? Were they able to like move it that easily while shooting?
No, this is the first film rolls,
Yeah.
first 10 rolls of film. They never had the use of camera movements before. So they put it on a tripod and it was unable to make a pan or a tilt because that was what ruined a good photograph, a photography, was to, if the camera was shaking or moving, it had to be very locked down. So there was no, you couldn't move the camera. Later, you can see films from the years after that where the camera is moved in very abrupt ways because the person with the camera simply takes the whole thing and sort of moves it like that. It took a while before they could make smooth camera movements. Why didn't they cut instead? They could have cut it and say, "Stop," and we'll move up closer with the camera and then continue. They could have done that, but these, again, first film, they didn't think about cutting up and gluing it together. But that, of course, came very soon. Yes, Kate?
I think it also like works with the storyline. Like the kid almost gets away, and then the Alonso gets him before he gets away, and then punishes him.
Yes, and makes it in a way more dramatic.
Yeah.
But it is fun to think that in real life, the gardener would probably just be quite happy getting hold of the boy where he was, and then giving him a good slap, 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 and then let him go. But he deliberately draws him back in front of the camera, so to show us the action, and then he lets him go. So, but I think in this we see the possibility of cutting and the possibility of moving the camera. And with moving the camera, you all of a sudden get a new tool for telling a story. Because when you move the camera to them over there, you say, let's follow them, let's look over here. Now this is where it's interesting. So the revolution of moving images is not just that now the object or the subject, the persons within the frame can move and you can see them move. But it's also that we, controlling the camera, can move the camera. So it's the moving camera that constitutes the new way of telling a story, the new way of communicating. It is not the moving picture, it is the moving camera. Well, it's not the moving characters or the moving motive, it's the moving camera. It's the frame that's moving, and it's the movements that are being cut. So cutting and camera movements is what constitutes the communicative tools of moving images. It's not just the actors or the things that you film. It is what you do behind the camera that constitutes the film as much as what happens in front of the camera. And that's a very important lesson. And it gives you, as camera people, the power to tell the story as you want it told. Okay. Now I want to move on very quickly to a very controversial film. It's it's recorded in 1934, but it was shown a year later, 1935. It's by Leni Riefenstahl, a German director who was first a dancer, and then she moved on and became a film star and a film director. And she made this film about the convention of the Nazi Party in Germany in 1934 in Nuremberg. And long film of something as boring as a party convention. But because she was a very clever filmmaker and had a lot of camera people and a lot of money and a lot of funds, which she was sponsored by the Führer himself, she could turn this into something very dynamic for the time being. When we see it today, we think it's a little boring, maybe, but there's a lot in it that makes it dynamic and special to the people at the time. It has been taken off the internet. Every time I have to show it, I have to find a new version of it, and then it's taken off because it's considered not good for you to see it. So, but I think I found a working copy. There's an American guy talking all over it, but even so, it's not completely ruined.
Took office. In the flight in Nuremberg, they were going to have another.
There are quite a few things I would like to talk about in this film. I think it's a marvelous film in terms of filmmaking. And I've studied it a lot in order to understand what it is she's doing, Leni Riefenstahl, to make it for that audience, maybe not for us, as engaging as possible, as interesting as possible. Did you notice, for example, that all the movements in this section was from right to left? They were driving from that side to that side. We saw a lot of shots of the cars driving, but in general the movement was in that way. The airport was over there and arrival was over there. So even though she had cameras placed all over town to film this, it was continuous movement. It was thought through where the camera should be placed. There were cameras outside and high up filming down on the cars, but there were also camera on board in Hitler's car filming him from behind. But did you think about that in the shots from outside, there was no camera crew? You thought about it, Caitlin? Very good. That means they must have stopped and taken out the camera crew, put it back in, or filmed it on 2 different days. Maybe some of the shots are taken on different days, different locations. We don't notice it. It's made smooth. We see all of the shots of the cat and the wealth symbols and cultural symbols and statues and the churches and the palaces, and all of that is sort of backing up behind Hitler and the new success of Germany. And it's all filmed in a nice, smooth way, as if it's what we see it from as we pass it with the car. It's no accident that a mother with a child on her arm comes up to him, gives him flowers. It's a very old trick. We still see it today when politicians arrive, or the Queen arrives, Danish Queen. We still see a lot of political leaders arriving in airports or arriving by car, lots of black cars driving through the city. Maybe it's shorter footage today, but we still see this symbols of power. There's a product placement here, speaking in modern terms. Did you notice the car? What brand was the car? Any of you?
Volkswagen.
Volkswagen? No.
Probably BMW?
It was a Mercedes. We saw the Mercedes on the front of it at some point. Yeah, so he was not driving an Aston Martin, but a Mercedes.
Good German.
Yeah, good German car. Even today, if you filmed him with backlight like this, you couldn't see anything here, you couldn't see his ear. But we can see it, so not only did she prepare with a backlight behind him to give him a glory, but also light from this side to enhance it a little bit so that we could see it was him. That is preparation, and that is the art of filmmaking, if you can do that, in order to show him as a nice person. Notice also, when he got out of the plane, first time you see him, nice little fellow. He doesn't look like a dictator. He even looks a little bit shy, very friendly. And he smiles, but a little shy, and he waves at people. Later, we see him in the film standing up high and looking down and talking to his people. And there he becomes dictator, but he is introduced by a camera almost looking down on him, making him small and humble. So we get close to him. We feel sympathy with him. And we see things with his eyes as he drives through the city. The film wants us to follow him in more than one sense. Yes. I'll make a summary of that next time when we pick up on a film lecture. But so far, thank you for now. And we'll have a break, and then we'll go on with the editing. Okay, thank you for now.
Okay.